And I'll start out this morning by admitting that I wrestled a lot with procrastination this week on this lesson. And it wasn't just because Christmas was coming, because that was an easy thing to be a distraction, was it not? All sorts of things that were going on there. It was that this lesson is it's going to be a challenging lesson. All right. Now, I've said that a few times, and I'm going to give you a little behind the scenes here. Whenever I sit down and I start to type my lesson out, one of the I mean, if you're welcome to come look at my notes, but I'll open up a document and I'll write welcome. I'll write core values. I'll write logistics. All right, these are all the things these are the boxes that I check whenever I come in here and I get started with you. Then the next thing I do is I don't even know what these characters are, these little greater than, less than things, but I'll write anticipation. Now, anticipation, I think we actually did a lesson on this many, many months ago, but it's a tool that I use as a reminder to say, hey, do something to set an expectation, do something to build anticipation for the folks that are here to make them interested in what it is that we're going to talk about. And oftentimes I'll get up here and I'll tell you I'm so excited for today's lesson, that it was a lot of fun to prepare for, and you're going to get a lot out of this. There's different things that I do to try to build anticipation. And that's what I'm intending to do today, but it's just a little bit different because today's going to be a tough one. Today's going to be a tough one. I don't want to give you a fair warning of that right now. It's a lesson that it's going to challenge you, and it's probably going to challenge you in a very personal way. So I just want to set that expectation with you, because today, as we continue our study of forgiveness, we're going to talk about a very specific group of people that we need to forgive, and we need to forgive parents. We'll jump into the deep water here to start with, and I will tell you that God works through imperfect people all the time. We know that. And some of those imperfect people would include parents. And God works through painful circumstances as well, right? And so we find ourselves as we go through life in places where we may have some unprocessed wounds or unmet expectations, or we may have misunderstood the authority of our parents, and it can lead to a place where we have people who have hardened hearts towards parents or towards children. We have these scenarios that come to mind. For your notes, 4 words. Most parents screw up. Yeah, right? Most parents screw up, right? Trace and I became parents just a few days before Christmas in 2003. And Trace and I would have thought of ourselves as reasonably sharp individuals. And then all of a sudden they said, well, you can take your kid home. I mean, what were they thinking? I mean, anybody else identify with that? Like all of a sudden, oh, by the way, this is yours. Good luck. We've been there, haven't we? We we didn't have a practice run. You know, we're in the middle of basketball season here. Beginning of basketball season, it's not uncommon to have some scrimmages, right? Like we didn't have any scrimmages to figure out how to do this, right? Like there was no practice. The reality is that parents are often doing the best they know, given the tools that they had, given the experiences that they had growing up, both good and bad. We've all had some good and bad experiences growing up. And with the level of awareness that we had at the time. You see, at the time, I thought it was going to be possible to protect our child from everything. Part of that included, like, we're just never going to leave the house, right? You know, it's like if we don't go outside, then there's no way the kid's going to get sick, right? You know, we don't, like, we had those different things. I have a couple of verses here to start out, and the first one I'm sure you've probably heard before. Romans 3:23 reads, "For all have sinned and fall short of the glory of God." That applies to you and me. I want you also to not miss that that applies to parents as well. Psalm 103:14 reads, "For he, God, knows how we are formed. He remembers that we are dust." So if God can remember that we're dust, then perhaps we should remember that we're dust as well. That we need to have the right perspective on this. Now, I'll tell you, whenever I first started developing this lesson, and a lot of these lessons are at least take a root from a series on forgiveness from Transformation Church. The root lesson that I looked at very much focused on fathers. And that became very, very personal. That became very, very hurtful. So I decided, why not just expand it, and we'll just all be miserable together this week. Right? We're gonna spread the net here. This is for parents. It's for step parents. It's for grandparents. It's for aunts and uncles, even favorite aunts and uncles. That's a joke just for me because I realize that none of my nieces and nephews like me, so I make them refer to me as their favorite uncle, just to antagonize them all the more, which probably is why I needed to learn this lesson today, right? Other people that it applies to teachers. This is a lesson that applies to teachers. It's a lesson that applies to coaches. It's a lesson that applies to spiritual leaders. It's a lesson that applies to anyone who's had authority and influence in your life. And these people have helped to shape you. We've talked in the past several, I think we're over 3 months now. I think this is lesson number 12 or 13 whenever it comes down to it. So if I do the math, I think we've been studying forgiveness now for 3 months. And one of the things that we talked about is that we need forgiveness whenever there is some offense, something that has happened that has hurt us. There is something that happened, and today I'm going to call that a wound. There was some wound that happened, and it happened because somebody who was supposed to protect you, or somebody who was supposed to guide you, or someone who was supposed to nurture you somehow missed the mark. Somehow missed the mark. And as I was thinking about this, I thought, you know, how true is it in life that the people that we are closest to are often the people who we are most harsh to? Like, there's things you have said in your house that you've probably wanted to say at the workplace, but didn't. I'm the only one. There we are. I heard somebody else. Yeah, if we think about it, there's times when things go a little bonkers and you get angry, and like you keep it under control in the workplace. But when you get home, all it takes is a kid leaving their toys out and you blow up. All it takes is a spouse saying or doing something, or not saying or not doing something that results in this. We are often most harsh towards those people who are closest to us. And you know what? It's not fair. It's not fair. And we talked about fairness last week, right? When something's unfair, that's the invitation for forgiveness. But because we are harsh with these people who are close to us, what that does is it makes it all the harder for us to process through this. It makes it harder for us to forgive people in these scenarios. Colossians 3:21, and I'll be curious. I want to encourage you to turn with me here because I'm curious if you have a footnote in your Bible. Colossians 3:21 reads, Father, footnote, question mark. Fathers, do not embitter your children, or they will become discouraged. Now, if you have a footnote, the footnote may read something like parents. Parents, do not embitter your children, or they will become discouraged. And I think that's a principle that can apply to all these authority figures, right? This can apply to aunts and uncles and grandparents and teachers and coaches and you name it. Speaking of teachers, James chapter 3, verse 1 reads, not many of you should become teachers, my fellow believers, because we know that we who teach will be judged more strictly. Teachers will be judged more strictly. Is that true for you? Does anybody have a memory of a teacher that just sticks with you? You have perhaps a more strict measurement with how that teacher conducted themselves, behaved, whatever. Now, you may have had a similar instance somewhere else in life, but it's that teacher. James tells us that not many of you should become teachers, but here's the thing. We're all teachers. As parents, we're all teachers. As aunts and uncles, we're all teachers. As brothers and sisters, we're all teachers. We must understand that parents can love deeply, yet they can still miss the mark. It is possible to love someone with all of your heart, yet somehow still manage to mess it up. That's a possibility, right? And we talked about this a couple of weeks ago, right? Or we talked about this when we went through that framework over the course of about a month. We talked about the difference between intent and impact, right? Now, on behalf of parents everywhere, I'm going to ask this question, and I'm going to answer this question. I don't believe there's a parent anywhere that woke up on any given morning thinking, I really hope I screw up being a parent today. Nope. Did anybody wake up with that aspiration? Yet, I think at the end of the day, we can probably find evidence that there were times that we missed the mark, right? That, there were times that we had the intent to do well, but the impact that we had fell short. We can have good intentions and we can still miss the target. And I was sharing this. I had the privilege this past week, I believe it was on Monday, to go to the doctor with my mother. My mother had a doctor's appointment. It was about an hour away. Uh, and it turned into a day that I was able to spend with my mother. And, if you ever have the chance to just spend the day with your mom, I recommend it. But as we were coming home, I was telling her this story, and I'm sure I've told this story to in this class before. You may not have heard it, but there was a time when Jess had a friend over. Now, the friend that he had over could get excitable. See if I can choose my words carefully here. There's times he could get wound up. And as such, whenever his dad would come to pick him up, one of the things his dad would say is, did my boy behave here today? And usually it was no issue, whatever. But on this particular day, um, there was whatever nonsense going on, kids being kids, and my daughters are in the room, and Jess's friend uses some very colorful language that as a parent I didn't appreciate. At which point, and I will tell you, the number of times my kids have seen me partially angry, they can probably count on two hands, probably on one hand. They have not really ever seen me completely angry. But I was close. I was close on that day. At which point I took all the fun out of the room and everybody was just going to sit on the couch for a little bit. And then Taryn goes walking by, and this friend says, "Hey, Taryn, come sit next to me." And I said, "Keep your hands to yourself." And the room was about this still. In a little bit, the boy's dad shows up, comes to the door. We go through the routine of, "Hey, how did everything go today? Did he behave for you?" And the little boy was there, and he said, "Yeah, Dad, everything was fine." And he goes running to the car. At which point I said, "Well, I don't know that I would say that." I said, there were some interesting things that happened here today. And, there were some comments that went back and forth. I said, "It'd probably be good if this friend doesn't come around for a while." And at the time, I would tell you I was operating with what I thought were the best of intentions. That was the best I knew how to do at the given moment. The impact, which I probably still don't completely understand, but I've come to realize since then that I probably did more to harm the church through that conduct than what I ever could have imagined. Obviously, here's a kid that has whatever going on, and this is a kid that needs transformation that only Jesus can offer. In my house, I would like to say that Jesus spends a little bit of time there. I would like to say that. But yet I would turn around and say, "Not welcome." I probably made things very awkward for Jess at school. We've never had that conversation. That's probably a conversation that we have at some point. I think it's fair to say that all of Jess's friends are scared to death of me, which I'm generally speaking okay with. I kind of like that aspect of it. But I recognize there was the intent, but the impact was far different than what I intended. And that's just a story that I can share with you. You may have a similar story, right? You may have a similar story. As parents, there's times that words come out of our mouths that we never thought we would say. Words like "clean your room," words that we hated to hear as kids, right? Words like "eat your vegetables." We didn't like eating vegetables as kids, right? Perhaps you've even used this one, because I said so, right? And as kids, we have a hard time understanding that because we don't understand the context. We don't understand we don't understand the importance over a period of time. And as such, what we do is we can interpret these things that our parents do in an inappropriate way. We can view these things as punishment. Now, I will tell you, I have sat at the dinner table with a child with a small plate of about 6 or maybe even fewer lima beans. There was punishment happening at that table. Watching that kid choke down 4 lima beans. At that, I mean, it got to the point where it wasn't just the principal; it became personal. Yeah, I mean, it was a rough go. I'll let Trace tell that story sometime if she wants. Um, but oftentimes what we do it's easy to confuse protection for punishment. What are you eating a vegetable for? Well, it's for a protection. It's for your good, right? It's for your benefit. There are times that feels like punishment, doesn't it? Just as an aside, Brendan tried to make dinner last night. She was trying to protect us, but if you ate it, you knew. It was punishment. It was a bit rough. Don't say anything to her about that, please. She was well intentioned. She was very well intentioned, right? 1 Corinthians 11:13 reads, "When I was a child, I talked like a child. I thought like a child. I reasoned like a child. When I became a man, I put the ways of childhood behind me." Proverbs 20:24 reads, "A person's steps are directed by the Lord. How then can anyone understand their own way?" You've likely heard me use this made-up story. And I like this made-up story because, one, I think it helps people see, uh, it's intended to help people see the value that they intrinsically have. And I tell the story that there was one day that God looks down on planet Earth and he says, you know what? Planet Earth is missing something. Planet Earth is missing you. And so he got to work and he formed you and he made you. And whenever he was done, he said, this is exactly what I want. This is exactly who I want. And he took you and he sent you to planet Earth. I was recently given a challenge on this thought. Now, granted, that's not a biblical story. It's just an illustration that I hope if you take that personally, you could be encouraged that when you look in the mirror, God intentionally made you. And he said, this is exactly what I want. But the challenge that was given to me recently is that God made you, and like just picture in your mind's eye, you're standing next to God, you're up in heaven, and God says, I need to send you down there. And you say, I'm willing to go. I'm ready to go. And he said, well, where am I going to send you? And somehow, the idea of your parents was presented. Well, in my case, there's Doug and Kathy in Cochranton. They need a kid. And I said, send me, right? I'll go. What was I thinking? Right? And maybe that's the same story for you. Right? This is where now you could go to Pennsylvania. You could have also gone to the Bahamas. There was an assignment in the Bahamas too, I'm pretty sure. There was an assignment in Hawaii. There was an assignment in Australia or any part of the world, right? But you said, you know what? That's the group. That's that's where I need to go. Somehow our parents were especially picked for us. And whether or not we were involved in that process, I don't know. I don't know that it matters for this, but um, I want you to know that your parents are not by accident. Funny thing is from the time God makes us and the time that He sends us down here, we forget everything. We show up in this world a blank slate, and we got to figure out all these things. And while in heaven, God may have said, hey, well, I'm sending you down there because this is what's going to go on, and this. By the time you get here, you don't remember any of that, and you got to figure it out as you go along. And we're all figuring it out, right? We're all figuring it out. We're all relearning things. And some of us have found ourselves in some very unique circumstances. And we find it that way because many parents parent the way they were parented. Take that note. Many parents parent the way they were parented. They said, this is how I was, right? Or they say, this is the way that I was parented. I'm going to do the exact opposite. Parents will repeat patterns that have been modeled for them, or they will overcorrect for patterns that were modeled for them. And as such, what they do is they will pass on programming and thought process and even unhealed wounds to the next generation. Now, it's one thing to understand this, right? It's one thing to understand that there's a behavior like this out there. It's another thing to excuse it, right? So, just because you can understand a behavior doesn't mean that you have to excuse the behavior. We need to recognize that. Just because you can understand a behavior, you can understand how a group of people got to be this way, it doesn't mean that you endorse what's going on there, right? So we're gonna take a step back. And the other thing I want you to know about this is that forgiveness is not denial. It's not forgiving is not saying that, well, this just didn't happen, right? Exodus chapter 20, verses 5 and 6. God says, you shall not bow down to them or worship them, for I, the Lord your God, am a jealous God, punishing the children for the sin of the parents to the third and fourth generation of those who hate me, but showing love to 1,000 generations of those who love me and keep my commandments. What we need to understand here is that there is a generational impact of parenting. Good stuff carries on, bad stuff carries on. Some instances, the generational thing was it was the family business, right? You go back a few hundred years, everybody like that's how we develop, you know, that's how we have all these millers, right? There are a bunch of people out there that were running the mills, right? You know, that's where the names came from, right? That was the family business, right? That's where all the bakers came from. They were all baking, right? You know, that's where it comes from. There is some connection there. And so when we recognize that, we recognize that those things carry on for good or for bad. Lamentations 5:7 reads, our ancestors sinned and are no more, and we bear their punishment. There's some things that we carry on from our parents. 2 Corinthians 5:17 reads, therefore, if anyone is in Christ, the new creation has come. The old is gone, the new is here. Those things that have been coming down from generation after generation after generation, especially if they're not in a positive sense, they are broken through Christ. They are broken through Christ. Now, if you go back, and I hope that some of you may have your little chart for that we worked on over the course of several weeks there. Um, but I want to remind you that forgiveness, depending on where it falls on that little scale, it doesn't mean that it didn't hurt. It doesn't mean that whatever happened didn't matter, and it certainly does not mean that it was okay. When we look at forgiveness, what forgiveness tells us is that we don't care about revenge. We don't care about getting even. We, when we talk about forgiveness, we say that whatever it was that harmed us, I'm not going to let I'm not going to let that harm define me. And when we talk about forgiveness, it's about saying, hey, we're taking this and we're giving it to God for justice to be served. When you go through the process of forgiveness, who gets freed is you, not the person who offended you. Ephesians 4:31 and 32 reads, get rid of all bitterness, rage, and anger, brawling and slander, along with every form of malice. Be kind and compassionate to one another, forgiving each other, just as in Christ God forgave you. Hebrews 12:15 reads, see to it that no one falls short of the grace of God and that no bitter root grows up to cause trouble and defile many. And this is where the lesson really got real. So for those of you who have been uncomfortable, it's going to get more uncomfortable. It gets worse from here. Because you see, there's times when we find ourselves in situations where we're angry with God. We find ourselves in a place where something that God has allowed to come our way has offended us in some way. And I got to be clear here. I am not saying that God sins. God is not capable of sinning. Whatever God says, that's the way it is, right? But there's times that God makes decisions that we don't understand. There's times when relationships go the wrong way. There's times when loved ones were taken. And if you were to make a list, I'd hazard a guess you can make quite a list. And it's, this can become such a struggle, such a stumbling block for so many people, right? They don't understand how God could let something like that happen. They use that to be a statement of why they will distrust or not believe in God. Last week, we talked about unfair. And forgiveness is necessary when something seemingly unfair happens, right? There's what would be fair, but now it's out of whack, right? And whenever something's out of whack, that is a situation that will require forgiveness. And so there's times when we need to forgive God because there's something that at least seems unfair to us. But again, God did not sin. But what we need to do is we do need to bring our disappointment to God. We do need to name what has us so confused and conflicted. We need to cry out that we lack understanding. We lack perspective. This isn't new. It's been this way for thousands of years. Psalm 13, verses 1 through 6. David writes, "How long, Lord? Will you forgive me? Will you forget me forever? How long will you hide your face from me? How long must I wrestle with my thoughts and day after day have sorrow in my heart? How long will my enemy triumph over me? Look on me and answer, Lord my God. Give light to my eyes, or I will sleep in death, and my enemy will say, I have overcome him, and my foes will rejoice when I fall." If you're following along, verse 5, the next word, circle that. But. This is where we're going to turn. But I trust in your unfailing love. My heart rejoices in your salvation. I will sing the Lord's praise, for he has been good to me. That was David's plea. If you want to turn back, I think I ran out of space. I got a bunch more verses here. We got a few minutes left. I'll push as far as I can here. Habakkuk, chapter 1, verse 2. The prophet Habakkuk writes, "How long, Lord, must I call for your help, but you do not listen, or cry out to you violence, but you do not save?" People have cried out unfairness to God for a long time. When it comes to forgiving God, I have three things I want to share with you. Number one, we need to release unmet expectations. We go back to that imaginary story. God says the world needs you, sends you down here. You don't know the whole plan, you don't know the whole purpose. That was forgotten on the trip down, right? And as such, you get down here, your expectations become a little bit different. Sometimes we need to release those expectations that weren't met. Number two, I'm going to call this upsize God. Now, let me explain that to you. Now, has anybody ever been to McDonald's before? Has anybody ever driven by a McDonald's? This is the class participation. Anybody ever driven by a McDonald's before? Has anybody ever been in there and said, please supersize my fries, right? We want more. We have to make it bigger, right? And there's times that we don't have the right picture of God. That we see God like this when God is like this or bigger, We got to upsize our picture of God. There's times that the version that we have of God that perhaps was explained to us, whatever, we need to upsize that for the situation that we're in. We probably didn't imagine this situation at one point, and we have to recognize that God is still bigger than that situation. Number 3, we need to trust God. Trust God's character, even when we don't understand his methods. Isaiah chapter 55, verses 8 and 9. God speaking through Isaiah says, "For my thoughts are not your thoughts, neither are your ways my ways, declares the Lord. As the heavens are higher than the earth, so are my ways higher than your ways, and my thoughts than your thoughts." We need to trust his character. We need to upsize our picture of God. Romans 8:28 reads, "And we know that in all things God works for the good of those who love him, who have been called according to his purpose." As I was putting this together, I thought, the story of Job is an interesting story. We don't have the time at our disposal to do an exhaustive integration of that story into this. But the very short version says that, Job was living a pretty good life, and then tragedy befell him. His family and his fortune were taken from him. And he had a lot of reasons to not understand. You get to the end of that book, Job chapter 42, verse 5 reads, "My ears have heard of you, but now my eyes have seen you." I think that's part of my prayer for us today, is that we have the right perspective to see God that way. Now, we may or may not get to that point of understanding of God's plan in our lifetime, but I want to encourage you that doesn't mean that God's plan isn't there. It doesn't mean that God's plan isn't working. The parents that we have on planet Earth are limited. They're continually learning. And chances are there's a little bit of inconsistency. I'll ask the parents in the room to evaluate themselves on that criteria. Right? Parents in the room, have you found yourself in a place of limitation? Have you found yourself in a place where you're learning new things? And have you found yourself doing things differently? And I'll tell you, if you want to find where you're inconsistent in your parenting, have a child who has a core value of fairness, who is very willing to point out your inconsistencies to you. But God, he's not limited. He is perfect in his love. He is constant in his presence, and he is faithful in his discipline. I'm going to jump ahead here to Hebrews chapter 12, verses 7 through 11. The writer of Hebrews writes, "Endure hardship as discipline. God is treating you as his children. For what children are not disciplined by their father? If you are not disciplined, and everyone undergoes discipline, then you are not legitimate, not true sons and daughters at all. Moreover, you have all had human fathers who disciplined us, and we respected them for it. How much more should we submit to the Father of spirits and live? They disciplined us for a little while as they thought best, but God disciplines us for our good in order that we may share in His holiness. No discipline seems pleasant at the time, but painful. Later on, however, it produces a harvest of righteousness and peace for those who have been trained by it. The discipline that we get from God is for our formation. It is not for our frustration. Brothers and sisters, as we continue on our study of forgiveness, an important step for each of us is the step of forgiving our parents. And to the parents in the room, I will tell you, we need to be forgiven. And perhaps that is something that we need to encourage or give permission to our kids for them to do. We need to forgive not because there were evil intentions, but oftentimes it was because there was a lack of awareness. So with that, I think this is going to be a good place for us to stop today.